What's up, YouTube? Mr. LaMissy here, and today we just listened to the Campfire chat from the Diablo team. This is in relation to them hearing us about the game not being fun. They admit that they removed the fun from the game, and they won't be doing that again in the future. There were some confusing parts for sure within it, I would say. I don't think I got everything on the first listen through, partly because I was trying to take notes and also listen, and partly because there was a lot of buzzwords and corporate talk in ways that also really confused me. So I think that was a little difficult, but I'll try and go through and get everything the best way that I can, link it all through of what they said, and then give my thoughts and opinions on all of this. Now, you might say, you're skipping season 1. Why are you watching this? And the reason is content, obviously. No, the reason I'm watching this is because I do want to see what the plans are for the future. I am interested in hearing their thoughts. And again, this is them saying we're listening to feedback and what they have, and I want to be able to then take this in and provide feedback to them and say, hey, yeah, I'm skipping season 1 because I don't think it's really worth playing with the changes and everything they've made. But if they make good improvements, if they are going to be changing this game, I do think there is a future where Diablo 4 eventually becomes a game that is decent enough to play some seasons, do some stuff. I just don't think it's currently here right now for me. So let's go ahead and kind of start, right? They said, first things first, live stream next Friday, so a week from today, to discuss the next patch. And then they said the patch will probably be coming a couple of days after that. This is patch 1.1.1, which I think it's supposed to be 0.1.1. But they kept saying 1.1.1. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's 1.1.1. Regardless, that's going to be coming, they said, within less than a couple weeks. They also said that they want to stop making changes so quickly, and to give us more time between hearing what the changes are and what they're actually going to give us. But then that's only going to be like, it seems like a couple of days. So it feels like maybe that one they're really going to push out, and then the future they're going to start doing at least a week of time before they start pushing changes in. And this is something I do think is important in games like this. Diablo 4 is a game where you invest a lot of time in your character. You're deciding at the start many times, I want to build this kind of character, and you're building all the way to get there. And if along that journey, or when you get there, whatever it is, all of a sudden they just hit you with a whole nerf, a giant patch that changes everything, and you didn't see it coming, it can feel really bad if now your character is bricked, or it just doesn't play as well, or whatever it is, right? It's not a good feeling. So I'm going to say good job to them, at least giving a week. I would say you want to give even more time for that, because that's just really important in games where people are dedicating time to characters. You don't want to just make changes so quickly. Sorry, shaky camera. You don't want to just make changes so quickly that everything they've done is just kind of like ruined in a way, right? The next thing they said is they admitted that this patch was bad, that it was a patch that removed fun, and that they're never going to do a patch like this again. It seemed a little reactionary almost in that way, and they seemed really like the part they focused on, it seemed like, were, oh, nerfs are really bad. But to me, it's like nerfs aren't bad when they're appropriately mixed in and when they're done correctly. It's just when they're bringing all these nerfs and all these pieces to, when they're not addressing the real issues, and then they're just weakening player power all over. I think that's when it was like really starting to feel bad, right? But also like nerfing things like cooldown reduction and stuff just didn't feel great like that. There were some that were just like not great nerfs that they did have in there. And like destroying the sorcerer, which already was a mess. They discussed the sorcerer and barb being extra nerfed, and especially the sorcerer really just kind of getting kicked down on the ground and curb stomped a little bit. And they discussed improving sorcerer and barb, but they said that they're really going to go about trying to do this by honing in on legendary aspects that are underutilized for the classes. And to me, again, it feels like trying to, oh, you're thirsty, let me throw you in a pool sort of thing, right? Like it doesn't feel like they're actually addressing the part that is why the sorcerer and barb are bad. Like, we don't want just the legendary aspects that are bad to now be improved a little bit. That's not what's wrong with the sorcerer, right? What sucks is I have to use 4 defensive skills on this character. I get 2 enchantment slots because you for some reason took away my 3rd one. I have to use Frost Nova because it's the only thing that applies vulnerable, or Ice Shards because it can apply vulnerable if I use the one, extended aspect or whatever skill on it. And that's all I get. And it's like the way that she's built, on top of resistances being broken and all sorts of these things, like, we know where the issues are. Fixing legendary aspects isn't the solution. So that, to me, I felt like was going to be iffy, and I'm not sure it's really going to address the issues there. They did, however, later on say that in this next patch, they recognize sorcerer survivability as garbage as well, and they want to, due to her innate terrible armor and resistances being broken, and they want to address that. So that was something they said later on. But yeah, overall there. A win that they did have, they're saying they're going to increase Nightmare Dungeon and Helltide density, which is something that I think everybody felt like was needed. It just felt a little too long in between mobs. So I think that is at least one positive for sure that did come out of it there. I think the whole world could use it, but hey, it's at least something, right? They heard people talking about stash tabs and how many issues they had with it. And so they decided they're going to give everybody one more stash tab because they feel extremely generous. Which, again, I think is kind of just funny. I don't think it's really addressing the issue with the stash. Especially when they gave us hearts now, and there's 32 hearts of varying roles, and so you're going to be storing hearts. It's like there's less space even now, So I don't know. I don't know why the stash tabs are being hoarded so much, and why the space within them, and why they don't want to just like make it a much bigger thing and allow you to sort and filter and all sorts of stuff. I don't know. But one more stash tab is what we're getting. And then elixirs will also stack up to 99 as well to hopefully give a tiny bit more space there. So that's a thing. They also discussed that respecs, they thought respecs, people were complaining about that, and so they're going to reduce the cost by about 40% of gold, which again I feel like is not actually addressing the issue. I don't think gold was the problem. I think the issue with respecs is it takes forever to do the entire respec, right? Like, having a loadout is the solution. Having a single button that'll remove it all is the issue. I don't think gold cost is what's really preventing people from doing all their respecs. So that, again, feels like something that's not fixing it, and they're still going to have people complaining about respecs in the future. They discussed looking at making level 50 to 100 faster. They recognized that they nerfed experience, but it was very strange how they discussed it, because they said, we saw players just engaging with monsters that were 3 levels above them, which of course was 25% experience boost. And we wanted players they weren't pushing themselves or challenging themselves to engage harder content. So we nerfed that experience from 25% to 15%. And now we can see that might have made it slower to level. And it was just confusing, because it's like, but you didn't give like bigger boost for fighting the more challenging content. And how is nerfing from 25% to 15% experience not going to make it slower, right? Of course that will make it slower. Or plus 3 level mobs were nerfed from 25% to 4.5%, and then it goes up to plus 10 level mobs, which were 15%, right? I think that's how they did it. So they actually made it where you have to engage with harder mobs to get less experience. But they weren't sure how that was going to make it slower. I don't know. It was confusing. So they're looking at adjusting that, they said. And then, of course, they said we're going to increase the density, so maybe that will help play into it. So we'll have to see how much density actually comes in, what the experience looks like, all of that. They also addressed Nightmare Dungeons being really difficult from at the higher levels. And they want it to be difficult, but not exactly in the ways that it is difficult. There was a lot of talk around that, and honestly, I didn't really get where they were landing on it. So I don't have much to say on that, because I was confused at the end of what they were doing to really adjust it. It felt like they just they want the only thing I got was they want the current level Terror Zone 70 to be as hard as 100, or vice versa. But I thought they wanted 70 to be the hardest spot, maybe. And so they recognize that they are overtuned, something like that. Current 70 is the new 100. But it still, to me, again, isn't addressing the issues of why they're hard and not fun in that way. All right, moving forward. They said gem change still looking to come in season 2. So probably October? Mid to late October, season 2. Gem change. And that's just moving the gems from your inventory to your materials bag. But then you have there, so I don't know. Again, and there's still nothing to really do with gems, so it's confusing. Season 3, they're going to bring leaderboards. They talked about building around something in the future that is competitive, which is what they want the leaderboards to do. They don't just want it to be your Nightmare Dungeon completed or your level or anything. But they want there to be something in the future that's competitive, and that's what the leaderboards will be there for. So that'll be, January probably, I guess. And I don't know. Are they just going to build greater rifts again, and that'll be it? It's confusing to me again. I don't understand why we don't just have a leaderboard for levels and things right now, because we have people doing level races, and that would be cool. But I'm not certain. Uber uniques. These are things like Shaco, Grandfather, stuff that currently is 1 in billions to find. They're so difficult to find that they're mathematically not even worth chasing after in any capacity. They said they don't want them to be expected to be part of builds. and they might make them a little bit easier to find in the future, but they never want you to expect to find the item. They want you to just be playing and the item to maybe potentially happen upon you. I don't know. I don't think that's... I think it's just a bad way they've introduced it. That's it. I just don't think it... Like, having items that are so impossible in lottery to find just doesn't seem fun to me. But we can agree to disagree. Because, I mean, even like Zodrune, Tyrael's Might, things like that, it's like you don't expect to find those exactly, but you can still kind of chase them within a few hundred hours. Whereas here it's like to find like Shaco in Diablo 4, it's like 1,000 years of playtime or something. So they're like 100 times as rare or more than the rarest Diablo 2 items. I don't know. Going back to dungeons, they agree that crowd control is a problem. How it's not fun to run into a mob that chills you or freezes you and then you're just like dead from that. So I don't think they mentioned what the solution would be. But yeah, that's what they said. They said, somebody asked about loadouts. This is where we're getting into the Q&A, so that's why it's kind of going to bounce around. Somebody asked about loadouts in the game, and they said that there's no timeline for loadouts yet, but it's something that they're thinking about potentially. Their design team has thought at one point about it, but no timeline for it. Somebody said it's boring playing through from level like 50 to 100. And the devs answered they want to create more goals and content for while you're leveling up. They didn't give any notes of what that stuff would be, when that stuff would be, anything like that. But they kind of said like this is the base game and we're going to be adding to it in the future, and we want to build more things, Nightmare Dungeons, Helltide, whatever. We want to put in more things for you to go do, which to me, again, it's like that's nice, but I also don't think it's really quite addressing the issue, which is the current things in there are not fun to play through. It's not like I need another shiny toy. I need 100 different shiny toys to go do, right? It's just like make the toys that we have more fun, right? Nightmare Dungeons, objectives suck. Do people like objectives in the Nightmare Dungeons? I mean, I'm honestly asking this. I hate them. I think they are so boring and awful. And they drive me away from Nightmare Dungeon so much. Maybe I'm an outlier, and maybe I'm just crazy. But I really don't think the Nightmare Dungeon objectives are fun. If the large portion of the community does, I'll just eat that and be like, yo, that's just not for me. But I don't even think people who like D3, D4, any of this stuff really enjoy running and fetching a mechanical box or a bloodstone or whatever piece and then bringing it back and placing it and, oh, you missed the spot. I don't think anybody is actually enjoying these. So it's like, get rid of these things and just let me run a dungeon. And I can either like kill stuff along the way in the dungeon, or I can rush to bosses to level up glyphs, or, have some freedom in how I want to do it, right? I think fixing this stuff is much better than looking at another flashy toy that we can put in the future. And again, maybe it's just me, but I really think that is like a big problem that currently exists in dungeons and why nightmare dungeons get very tiresome and why it's not a fun experience to level to 100 there. And so I'm like, just work with what you got. And like, I actually enjoy Helltides. I think like Helltides is actually a decent one, but why does it have to shut off and I can't do it sometimes, you know? The next piece, people said there's too much loot that I'm just looking at, and it's not fun trying to always figure out which like piece of loot, you know, I have to pick everything up and then all of that stuff. They said they want to reduce the difficulty of comparing items, things like a loot filter and such. But again, there was no specifics on that. And this is again somewhere that I would urge Blizzard to focus on, because yes, it's very tiresome picking up 90% of items that drop, since everything that drops is rare or legendary pretty much, picking all of it up and then looking at all the aspects across all of the things, or all the affixes and all the aspects, and then 99% of the time or more it's just trash, you know, 99.9%. But I have to like check it because that's the like when I could actually find the good item. Having a loot filter, having something to reduce that would also improve the fun of the game. I would definitely say. Somebody asked about target farming. They said in season 2, again late October, they want to create more target farming for certain uniques and aspects. I think that's a small thing. Again, I think there's a lot bigger things to focus on really in the game. But my guess is that's coming from druids looking for Tempest Roar, because that's such like a build enabling item that it's like, if I can't get Tempest Roar, then I can't make the build I want. And so I have to go farm that because I can't trade for it. And so I want to be able to target farm that. Which again, to me, the problem doesn't come from that we need to have that target farm. The problem comes earlier, right? In that we can't trade for that. That, you know, it is such a required item for the build, like all of this stuff, you know. Okay, moving on. Group finders, partying. They said, you know, we recognize a lot of people are saying that the social aspects are lacking. We have no timeline for that, but the team is looking into it. Again, something I would urge the Blizzard devs to focus on. Social aspects are like a large part, especially in an always online game. And Diablo 4 isn't just missing some, they're missing like everything. It is so lonely in the game. I think this should be a high priority of really looking, because even if your game isn't amazing, if it's really got a lot of good social aspects where I can talk and make friends and play with people and whatever stuff, that at least will bring people together and get people playing the game more. But when it's so lonely out there and there's no good way of finding groups to do all this content and stuff, I think you're going to just have people leaving so much faster, right? So I think this would be something to really focus on as well. Survivability, they said they'll discuss changes to this next week, notably the sorceress, like I said before, and her terrible armor. And they're also going to look at adjusting some monsters that are wrecking people, namely CC from cold enchanted monsters, charging monsters, and monsters that explode. So they are looking at that. I definitely think the exploding monsters are definitely like the worst feeling, when you're just like trying to pick up a piece of loot and then it explodes because it explodes 3 times 3 seconds later or whatever. I think those just aren't like fun deaths, and I think that kills a lot of people. Again, with the stash, somebody was like, my stash is just full of aspects. Can you fix it? And like, could you put it into the Codex? So like, as I find a good affix, for a good aspect, I can just put that into my Codex, and then now I always have that there. I thought that was a great idea. That's an idea I actually had before, but I'm happy other people have that idea as well. Your Codex is just a place where you have all the aspects, and whenever you find like a perfect one, awesome. Now I put that perfect aspect in my Codex, and I have it there, and I can use it around, and it's like you can go collect, try and get the perfect Codex everywhere, all the fun pieces there. They said that seemed like a good idea, but they're just talking right now about ways to not have your stash full of aspects. I really wish that they would do something cool like that. Again, I had that same idea, so of course I really like it. But I think there's a lot of decent ideas for ways they could improve that. Season 2 is their current plan for fixing resistances. Somebody said, what is your plans for resistances? Because they're broken. They said we're still looking at making that change in Season 2. Again, this feels like a hot fix sort of thing. If resistances, which are a core piece of the game, aren't working, like you have to balance a lot of stuff around resistances. But if it's not, you're trying to balance without that, and then you're going to fix it all in Season 2, then you'll have to like change all the balancing. I mean, it just feels like you got to get those things right first. For people that are like, you're not a software dev, you don't understand. I mean, actually I am. That's what my job was for 7 years before I got into streaming. I was a software dev. I understand things take time to push out and make changes to software. Again, I think this is where you focus on a hot fix. When there were urgent issues that were occurring in production, sometimes you would rush and push changes forward to fix said things. Resistances shouldn't be such a mess in all of this code or something that it's going to take months to get pushed through. Campaign bosses coming in the future was a question mark. People were like, hey, can we fix actually fight campaign bosses again? And Joe Shelley basically said, there may be some in the future, but I can't say any more about it. So essentially, it's probably in a league or in an expansion for the game where you'll get to fight campaign bosses again. Again, I really wish that we could just like go farm in Dariel and Duriel again, but whatever. More plans for crafting in the future. They said that they are looking for more opportunities. Again, no timeline on this. Just like somebody was like, hey, crafting's pretty basic and boring. And they said, we're looking at this for future changes. So not really certain on all of that. Somebody asked a question about companions. Will companions get like more? And will they be more viable builds, like really to be like a full companion build? They said the team wants to explore it in the future. They understand, especially for the druid, there's not a lot of interaction. But they also don't think it's really going to be like top tier stuff, but maybe. And then they said, we think, somebody asked about goblin types. And they said, Diablo 3's got a lot of treasure goblins. And they said, we'll think about adding more fun goblin types in the future. Currently, they're thinking about buffing legendary drop rates from them. So you want more of those. And then some of the funniest things from it. Number one, I'll present you with this, which was the question about Necromancer's minions.
If there's any changes or plans for those to actually potentially get a little bit more tweaked up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something we do care about. One of the things that
this is something we do care about. just a funny moment. He admitted afterwards, he was like, that sounded a little dismissive. We care about the other stuff too. But the way he said it. But that was one funny moment. But the funniest moment, highlight of the day, goes to this right here. When somebody said, hey, why did you change it from 3 seconds to 5 seconds to make us leave a dungeon? Are you just trying to make us waste more time for your metrics, essentially? Which is something that was asked before, and something that people had discussed before as well. Because people were like, we think that they're just trying to make us waste more time in the game, right? 3 seconds to 5 seconds doesn't seem like a lot, but you multiply those 2 seconds times every time that you load out of a dungeon times the millions of people that play the game, and oh my gosh, that is a big increase in the amount of time spent in the game, which then, of course, you can report to the executives. And there's a whole thing about why that is now the useful metric that companies are looking for and all of this stuff. And I was like, okay, sure. But what probably happened is they just were wanting to make it so that when the butcher was in a hardcore dungeon, hardcore players couldn't just port out. The 5 seconds would be enough where the butcher would catch them and knock them out. Or something along those lines. So when this question was asked, I was fully expecting them to simply say, yeah, we found hardcore players just avoiding the butcher by porting out, and so we increased the time so they couldn't. We recognize this doesn't feel great for other characters though, and other players, and so we'll adjust it maybe or whatever. Instead, this is the answer we got.
That's a punchy way to say it.
Punchy way. Kennywa says, question, why did you guys increase the cast time on stuff like leaving dungeons? Feels like you're trying to slow down the game by making us waste time for something that might feel useless.
We can look at that. We'll continue to evaluate that change. It's a fairly small difference. I know that in an ARPG, small amounts of time can be meaningful. We did add the reset dungeon button back in. It does require that you're outside the dungeon, and so there's kind of a loop there.
To which I said, what? They didn't even give an explanation for why they put that change in. What? There's no, why did you make this slower? Well, we can evaluate it. We're always looking at, small changes like that. It was a small change, just a couple seconds extra that you're going to wait. So, it's something that we're always evaluating. What are you talking about? Why did you put it in? Are you actually trying to make us think that it is a change that was just put in to slow us down? Because I didn't think it was. I actually was on your side, and when people were saying that, I was like, guys, that's ridiculous. That's not why they're putting it in. They put it in for the hardcore characters and whatever it is. But now after that answer, I'm like, well, now I kind of feel like they wanted to improve the time played in the game metric, and they did it. Like, it's literally just increasing the time spent in the game, or looking at your cosmetic on your character maybe, and somebody in marketing was like, if you spend greater than 4 seconds looking at the cosmetic, then you'll be more likely to buy one, whatever it is, right? I don't know. Give me a real answer, because now I'm coming up with all sorts of crazy things and reading and believing all the crazy things that I'm seeing, because that's the answer that you're going to give to that? I mean, that one really is disappointing, because it also makes me question now everything else in the game. Like, why do I have to constantly, if I'm in the cellar, go over and place the chalice? And the chalice takes 3 seconds to place and then go back and now place the other one and put the candle over here and interact with this. There's already a lot of time waste in this game. Let's be honest. There is just so many places where it's like, why? Why am I having to sit here? The escort missions, waiting for the wolf to walk over to the portal and turn around and sit before you can talk with him again, right? So many things. Barricades for horses, right? Whatever. So many things that are already making me spend more time in this game. And I'm trying really hard to not think you guys are just putting these barriers in to slow us down so that you can increase your time per played played metrics. But then you start saying stuff like that, and I'm having trouble. I'm really having trouble with understanding this, because that's a change, man. That's a really important change that I feel like you should be able to address and tell us why we now have to wait longer to leave a dungeon. And you say it's something we just look at. It's not really a big change. We just are, assessing it always. That one was pretty infuriating. Because like I said, that makes me have big questions around that and then further on. And I was trying to defend you guys, but now I'm like, I don't know. The last thing that I want to address, it's like when you go to a doctor's office and they make you wait 30 minutes. You're like, hey man, my time is also valuable. Like, what's up? The last thing I want to address is they discussed vulnerable at the start when they were saying how they made things less fun. And they talked about how they made changes to vulnerable because vulnerable was just too important, right? They said it's just too important overall, and so we had to make changes. We wanted to bring it down so it would be less important. But the issue is, with the current bucketing damage system that they're using, what is the most important damage bucket right here? What is going to improve my damage the most? Is it more in this bucket, more in this bucket, or more in this bucket? The answer is this bucket. Whatever your smallest bucket is, when you have multipliers across buckets, like this, whatever the smallest number is, raising that up will give you the most damage, right? It doesn't matter if this is your vulnerable bucket. It doesn't matter if this is your damage versus CC. It doesn't matter what is in this bucket. It is literally just whatever your smallest bucket is. The more you can raise that number, the better overall your damage output will be. That's just the math from multiplying across with that. So, the problem with nerfing vulnerable, if you knock this down to 30 and you remove 40%, you have not only not made vulnerable less important, you have actually made it more important because it's an even smaller number now. Thus, the more that you can raise the smaller number up, the more important it becomes. So all you've done is you have lowered the overall damage. This is just damage overall. You have lowered your overall damage, and you have increased the need for vulnerable. That's all that's happened by making this bucket smaller. And so it's like changes like that, when they throw that stuff in so quickly, you're like, what are you doing? It's confusing because either A, you don't understand how your damage is actually being pushed through, or you just didn't think in some way when you were doing it, whatever it is. But again, it's not making any improvement. This is the problem. It's not that you're removing fun in that sort of way, whatever. It's that all you did was make vulnerable even more important. People don't want to have to play with vulnerable, and now you need to even more so than you did before, which was already so much, right? So these sorts of things are they're just problematic. And again, it's something that they threw in so quickly, and you just it just gives me questions. That is the piece. It just gives me questions overall. This rant is accurate. The lower this number gets, the more important it becomes. Plain and simple. That is how buckets work for damage calculation. Now, if you actually want to fix vulnerable, move vulnerable into like this. Just completely shift it out of its own bucket. There you go. Now vulnerable is not required, right? Or allow sources to give more. Or same thing you could do with like cooldown reduction. Have there be a cap. Yeah, people need to hit that cap and still need to make things vulnerable, but like, all right, at least it's not required on everything I can get it on. That'd be better on cooldown reduction. If you, rather than nerfing cooldown reduction, which again makes it even more important to have on every single piece of gear, just cap it if you want. And then now, okay, I just get cooldown reduction on like 2 pieces and then I free up some slots elsewhere, you know? There are solutions. They're not always the best solutions, but these are just off the top of my head, just random ways that you could do it that would actually be better than the current way it is implemented. And I'm sure there is an even better way to implement this. But again, honestly, the biggest issue, especially with vulnerable, is that vulnerable is its own bucket. That is just completely the issue. Because again, when you look at something like the sorcerer, how does a sorcerer apply vulnerable? You can either have ice shards where once it hits 5 times, it can apply vulnerable. So you need all the shards to hit. Or, which isn't like great, but it's okay, or Frost Nova. Thus, every single sorcerer build jumps into the middle and uses Frost Nova, and then uses their skill. And that becomes every sorceress build in the game. And it's not fun, but you have to, because if you don't make them vulnerable, you don't do damage. It just sucks. So it just causes issues. How it is here. It just causes issues. Give more items the ability to do it, change up the bucket system. There are a lot of things to be done, but the one thing not to be done is just reducing how much vulnerability or vulnerable damage items provide. That's like the one thing, because it actually just makes you need more of it and raises the importance. So that's my rant on that piece. But overall, that is I think, decent summation of the stream. I try not to be too negative or anything through that. I hope I wasn't. I tried to be pretty fair, give ideas, give suggestions, and also just indicate the stuff that is coming down the pipe. Remember, next week, a week from today, Friday the 28th, there will be the patch 1.1.1. So that will be coming right there. Regardless, don't forget to like and subscribe, YouTube. Mwah. Kisses to you all. Peace, everybody.